Well, hello there and welcome to this tutorial. My name is Ash and today I'm going to go over the process of drawing a dragon, specifically the body of a dragon. And I'm going to start with this generic Western dragon that you see in front of you with 4 legs and 2 wings, just to get the basics out of the way, and then in a future video I can show specific types of dragons like Night Furies or Eastern style dragons and stuff like that. So let's get started with the skeleton. I start pretty logically with a circle for the head. I add an oval for the rib cage and a line to represent the rest of the spine and tail. I add a box to represent the snout, and that's pretty much it for the skeleton. I keep this really simple so that it's easy to change, because this is the stage where I want to get the exact pose that I want. I don't want to draw a pose and then have to change it after I've already added limbs and, God forbid, details, so. Step 2 is fleshing out the body, which is literally turning your line into a tube, connecting the circles to each other, and basically adding some girth to your dragon. Am I allowed to say that? I don't mean it in a bad way. It comes out like that. The next thing I do is get rid of some of those construction lines so I can see the proportions better. And you'll note that I don't draw a circle or a box for the hips or pelvis. And that's because for the creatures I like to reference, they don't really have a boxy hip. So if you look, for example, at the skeleton of a dog, you can see that their pelvis is very much in line with their spine. It doesn't bulge out from the line of their body, basically. In the opposite case, if this dragon were going to be based off of like a T-Rex, it would definitely have like a box for the hips, because T-Rex had a pronounced pelvis, if that makes sense. Okay, step 3, add legs. Definitely optional. Your dragon can have no legs and still be a valid dragon. I'm just gonna say that, but this dragon today is gonna have legs. When I draw legs for dragons, I think of them in 3 parts. And those are the scapula, the humerus, and the forearm area. I know the bones, okay? That's a lot of bones for a drawing tutorial. So the scapula will start at the dragon's chest and go to its back. The elbow lines up with the rib cage, so that's where you put the humerus, shoulder to elbow is the humerus. And then below that is the forearm. And I have found, at least for my style of dragons, that it doesn't really matter how long the lower limb is, like the forearm, because as long as the elbow lines up with the rib cage and the knee lines up with the elbow-ish, it kind of just looks okay. For the hind limb, I usually have the angle of like knee to hip kind of similar to the angle of the scapula, but maybe not quite as angled. This one for me is definitely based on feel, which comes with practice and looking at references. Okay, next is a really fun part, which is adding muscles. So I try to get basic shapes. I speed up in this section because it takes me a little bit longer. Feel free to pause and look at what's going on. But yeah, this part is really fun, but you definitely need references. I have a giant Pinterest board of so many animals, and I use them for references all the time, especially for muscles. Because animal muscles, especially quadruped muscles, look different and are arranged differently than human muscles. And I mean, even artists that draw humans still have to look at references, so I think for dragons it's a bit harder, again, because you can't just snap a pic of your dragon and study its musculature that way. You kind of have to gather and synthesize information from other quadrupeds, and I'm sounding a lot like You know, your like high school English teacher who's telling you about analytical thinking. And yeah, I'm just having a very specific flashback right now to like this extremely structured essay format of like quote sentence followed by analysis sentence followed by another quote sentence, and I really don't like this, so I'm gonna move on. So because there aren't like 30 hours in a day, I recorded the tutorial on my iPad like several days before I'm doing this voiceover, and I see right here is me trying to be funny, like usual. This is very classic for me. But yes, for this dragon, we are going to add wings. And as the text pop-up says, I like to draw these on a separate layer because I usually end up redoing them. And it's a lot easier to just clear layer than erase around what I've already drawn. So yeah. Good references for dragon wings are bat wings, bird wings. I have a lot of those on that giant Pinterest board of mine. This dragon is gonna have a bat wing. So this one I did 4 fingers rather than 5. I don't know why, but I draw like a skeletal finger almost, and then I just connect them with the membrane. And yeah, I don't really have any tips or tricks for dragon wings. I kind of just do it. So I guess that's my advice. Just do it and come up with a shape that you like for your dragon wings. Dragon wings are a really good tool for getting like a composition that you like. You know, the flow that you want. All of those like artsy terms that I'm not exactly sure what they mean, but I feel like they are important, maybe, according to science. I don't know. So I usually add like extras like frills and spikes at the very end. But you know, this could be a bit of a drawback sometimes if you incorporate spikes and stuff really early into your drawing, like in the skeleton phase. You might end up with an anatomy that looks more natural or flows better. So I might try that in the future, but for tutorial's sake, these are extras that you can add on as you please. And then, at least for the drawing part, the last step is to lower the opacity and redraw the whole thing on a new layer. I know the golden rule for clean line art is confident strokes and, you know, single strokes rather than a bunch of sketchy lines. But sometimes my hands are unsteady, so I have to cheat a little bit. And I'm going to show you that in real time so that you can also cheat, because cheating is what brings digital artists together. So essentially what I do is I highlight sections of the tail, and then I just use the warp tool to smooth everything out. This particular tail that I drew is extremely unsteady, so I do end up having to fix it beyond just warping some of the lines. But usually this trick works really well for me, and it's nice. And now you can cheat too. I don't know why. If someone were to ask me, like, what's the hardest part of drawing a dragon, I would definitely say the tail. For some reason, I can't. My hands aren't steady enough, I guess. So the rest of this video is me fixing the tail and then cleaning up the dragon further. I end up being kind of unhappy with my cleanup for the first round, so I end up turning this layer into a low opacity layer and then redrawing again over that, and that's kind of the dragon that you end up seeing in the thumbnail / initial section of the video. I guess another tip is when you're drawing, don't be afraid to redo things. It actually helps me learn a lot when I redo something. It like puts things into muscle memory or something. I don't know. It helps. So I would certainly encourage you to pause the video, especially in the muscle section or at the end end with the final view of the dragon and utilize, utilize references, because seriously, they help a ton. But yeah, my plan is to be back with more tutorials, potentially details of dragon musculature, different types of dragons like Night Furies, Eastern dragons. I also really like the idea of making like painting tips and tricks videos, or like painting a dragon in Procreate and stuff like that. So yeah, stay tuned for those, and I'll see you around, I guess.